Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Wilson Center and welcome to the launch of Lessons of Operation Car Wash. I'm delighted to be moderating today a panel with an illustrious set of three speakers. I know that you have their bios, but let me just begin by introducing them briefly. Today we'll be hearing from Maria Lucia Padua Lima, a professor at the Fundação Getúlio Vargas, the Associate Dean of International Relations at the Fundação Getúlio Vargas Law School. She is an economist by training and has been a postdoc here at Georgetown University's Law Center in Washington. The two editors of this volume, Paulo Goldschmidt and Fabio Bechara, are also here with us. Paulo Goldschmidt is the head of the Anti-Corruption Study Group at the FGV Law School in Sao Paulo. He's a former president and CEO of the Sao Paulo Subway Company, and he is a doctor in business administration at the Fundação Getúlio Vargas. Finally, Fabio Ramazzini Bechara is state electoral prosecutor for the state of Sao Paulo. He's a professor of criminal law at Mackenzie University in Sao Paulo, and he is a global fellow at the Brazil Institute of the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Center for Scholars. It's a real pleasure to have all three of you here with us today and to discuss Operation Car Wash. In preparing for today's event, I began to look through some of the academic and journalistic literature on car wash. And as you can imagine, it has garnered just incredible headlines over the past 6 years that it's been underway. One of the leading scholars, or two of the leading scholars of corruption, wrote in a book that it was, quote, the largest corruption scandal ever to beset a democratic nation. And so in 6 years, Operation Car Wash has uncovered billions of dollars of ill-spent funds. It's recovered a significant volume of those. And we are delighted to be able to discuss this with the three of you today and hear the results of your research. So welcome. Maria Lucia, we'd like you to begin. I know that you have a presentation. We've agreed to keep the presentations relatively short. We'll do the three presentations, then we'll go to some Q&A, and then that I'll drive. And then at the end of that, I look forward to taking questions and answers from the audience. So please send those in, the audience. We're welcome. We're glad to have you here with us on this beautiful Tuesday morning. So Maria Lucia, without further ado, welcome and thank you for being here with us this morning. You're on mute still, Maria Lucia. You're still on mute.
I'm mute. Okay, sorry. Okay, good morning. My name is Maria Lucia Padua Lima. I'm from Fundação Getúlio Vargas, and it's a pleasure to participate in this presentation. My colleagues, Lígia Maura Costa, Paulo Goldschmidt, and I were responsible for one of the chapters of this new book. Well, this book is about combating corruption in Brazil, especially systemic corruption. It does not deal with the petty corruption, although recognizing that all types of corruption should be firmly combated. Petty corruption is much less important than systemic corruption. The differences are based on what the two types of corruption represent in the institutional, political, and economic scenarios for a country. The damage imposed on Brazil by the systemic corruption implemented by acting political forces in the last 2 decades is of an amazing scale when compared to any other country in the world. As it is well known, the petty corruption describes to the ordinary corruption that takes place when officials meet public. On the other hand, the systemic corruption may be described as a situation in which key institutions and processes of the state are consistently dominated and used by corrupt individuals and groups. In this regard, systemic corruption should be viewed as involving practices which are permanent, centralized, and widespread in government activities. A network of corrupt persons acting together and performing different roles follow a common set of norms and rules, normally in a formal scheme. In this sense, systemic corruption is much more than individual behavior. With the target of analyzing the causes and effects of the systemic corruption, and particularly the responses given by the legal authorities involved in Operation Car Washing, a group of researchers and professors of three leading academic institutions in Brazil, Fundação Getúlio Vargas, Universidade Presbiteriana Mackenzie, and Universidade de São Paulo, decided to deepen the analysis of the famous operation in order to better understand the details of the phenomenon it presents. This work was completed with the cooperation and support of the Brazil Institute of Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much. Broadly speaking, corruption is comprehended as a misuse of public resources by public officials for private gains. Considered as one of the greatest challenges in the modern world, corruption may paralyze good governance, cause misallocation of public funds and resources, distort public policies and the rule of law, harm the economic growth, but the most important, compromise democracy. Fighting corruption is not an easy task. Moreover, as already stressed, systemic corruption is dangerous to democracy due to the fact that it takes over of key institutions and process of the state, as mentioned before. Actually, in Brazil, the legal framework on anti-corruption and anti-bribery is not new, although have been upgraded, especially in the last decade after Operation Car Wash began. The Brazilian Criminal Code, just to give an idea, issued in 1940, covers crime associated to practice of corruption, such as extortion, bribery, active and passive corruption. More recently, in 2012, a new chapter was added to the criminal code, inserting a special emphasis to the crime of active corruption in international commercial transactions. Still on criminal matter, it's relevant to consider the Brazilian anti-money laundering law from 1998 and the criminal organization law from 2013 that regulated plea bargains by cooperating suspects. Aside with criminal liability, there is also a range of Brazilian laws dedicated to imposing administrative and civil sanctions to acts of corruption and dishonesty committed by public and private agents. For example, the law of the administrative dishonesty for 1992, which defines the hypothesis of dishonest acts and establishes important sections for public agents that illicitly abuse of their public position to accomplish their private interests. Other is the public bidding law from 1993, providing that fraud by any entity, public or private, or abuse of power by public agents may result in fines, temporary suspension, and possible constraint to enter into contracts for future works with the public administration. In 2013, The Brazilian anti-corruption law was issued aiming to regulate the strict civil and administrative liability of legal entities, including corporations, foundations, associations, and any legal entity committing corruption acts against the public administration, national and foreign. Yeah? This law establishes sanctions for pecuniary fines to administrative penalties, such as mandatory termination of the legal entity implicated in corruption actions. More recently, important efforts have been made to improve the Brazilian legal system in order to actually combat corruption. In this sense, it's important to add the law of state-owned and mixed capital enterprises, issued at the end of 2016, mainly dedicated to create a legal basis for practice of governance in these companies. This law is also concerned with the implementation of compliance programs and the approval of codes of conduct and integrity policies to these entities. In short, currently, Brazil has a legal framework to combat corruption in compliance with international standards that criminalize major offenses on corruption. However, although long established, it's clear that the legal framework on anti-corruption and anti-bribery in the country, in Brazil, was not enough to avoid, for example, the wrongdoings committed by years in Petrobras. In addition to support the continued fight against systemic corruption, the different chapters in this book share another common ground: the use of Operation Car Wash as its central focus. In general, Operation Car Wash may be viewed as a method of uncovering these crimes committed by individuals, public officials, politicians, and private organizations against Brazil public coffers, and submit these offenders to the penalties established by the law. Just as systemic corruption has a method of appropriating public institutions, Operation Car Washing has developed an efficient method of tracking this time or crime. Yeah? The fight against these crimes is the main motto of Operation Car Wash. In fact, the numbers behind Operation Car Wash are impressive and show an articulate and precise process of investigation, fact-finding and analysis, and judicial action against criminals. Since its beginning in 2014, Operation Car Wash obtained the following results that you can see here. Just a moment. Okay, this is very impressive. The numbers is very impressive. You see 70 phases or operation resulting in 130 compliance of, and 107 criminal actions, 172 convicted in the first and the second instance, 209 plea bargains, and this is also interesting, 1,770 international collaboration requests. Yeah, in its 6 years, yeah, of existence, the amount of money, as Matthew mentioned at the beginning, recovered is also incredible, as you can check in this other slide. You know, the numbers is here. This is official numbers. It is the contest using a specific methodology that the Petrobras systemic corruption scheme became public. It's interesting to stress how important Petrobras is for the Brazilian economy since its creation in 1953. based on a fundamental strategic intention to provide the country with a suitable source of oil and crucial byproducts for the country's industrial development. Since its creation, Petrobras was considered and operated as an important military asset. In fact, the first Petrobras president was a Brazilian general. For many decades, being part of Petrobras was a matter of pride of its employees. Meritocracy was the fundamental basis to select Petrobras personnel. Even when Petrobras became a mixed capital company in the 90s, the principle of meritocracy was fully maintained. However, this pattern changed during the period that the Works Party, PT, remained in power from 2003 to May 2016. During this period, loyalty to the party became the most important criteria to fill the managerial positions in the company. The dramatic change in government was one of the main reasons why the company was involved in the largest corruption scandal ever known in the country. In March 2014, a money laundering investigation started in 2008 by the Brazilian Federal Police progressed to a complex corruption network involving Brazil's giant mixed oil company Petrobras. In this investigation, codenamed Car Wash Operation Car Wash is the same, the Brazilian Federal Police obtained judicial authorization to breach telephones, emails, and bank transactions of a suspect dolero. Dolero in Brazil is a person who operates in a legal business involving foreign currency transaction. Analyzing this information, Brazilian Federal Police tracked numerous and significant payments to several politicians in Brasilia, the Brazil capital, made by the suspect Dolero. The payments had origin on a gas station in Brasilia, owned by the Dolero, hence the name of the operation, Operation Car Wash. The aforementioned local gas station in Brasilia was part of a payment system operated not only by the initial suspect, but also by 3 other doleros, okay? The Brazilian Federal Police, monitoring the doleros involved in this operation, led this investigation to a Petrobras executive, Mr. Paulo Roberto Costa, who had been appointed to this position by the same politician accused of involvement at the beginning of this money laundering investigation in 2008. The criminal scheme started to be uncovered from Mr. Costa, please begin, is summarized by the Minister of Public Prosecution as a scheme which lasted at least 10 years, where large contractors organized into cartels paid bribes to Petrobras senior executives and other public officials. The amount of bribes ranged from 1% to 5% of the total amount of overpriced contracts. These bribes were distributed to the financial operation of the scheme, including doleros investigated in the first stage of the investigations. According to the Ministry of Public Prosecution, Petrobras was part of a scheme of systemic corruption composed by different actors and led by the federal government. Yeah? The corruption engineering was formed by 4 groups of actors. First one, the political unity, composed by the federal government, controlling and largest shareholder of Petrobras, plus Works Party and allied parties. Second, uh, participants, administrative unit formed by Petrobras officials. 30, business unit made up by the Petrobras suppliers. 40, the operation unit composed by financial operation doleiros and front companies. The common ground of all these accusations is the fact that the undeniable criminal scheme led by the federal government was not only for illicit enrichment, but especially to gain elections and to achieve governability based on corruptive practice with the consequences of the criminal perpetuation in power. I hope this initial explanation, even in a nutshell, helped to clarify the difference between a petty corruption and a systemic corruption. The use of large state-owned mixed capital corporation and public institutions as instruments for implementing a sustainable corruption scheme for political purpose. My colleague Paulo Goldschmidt will discuss now the Petrobras financial results. Thank you so much for your attention.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Professor Maria Lucia Padua Lima. It's very always surprising to see the volumes involved here of currency transactions, of bribes, the possibility that 1 to 5% of these transactions were all corrupt. And that certainly gives credence to the claim that this is not any kind of corruption, but rather systemic corruption. So I hope we can return to that in the Q&A. And that offers an opportunity just to mention two things. One is that you can email any questions to brazil@wilsoncenter.org or tweet us at BrazilInst, that is Brazil INST. And please feel free to begin submitting questions as you feel free in the audience as they occur to you. I also want to apologize. We began without distinguished Brazil Institute Senior Fellow, Paulo Sotero, the Director Emeritus of the Brazil Institute. He is sideways on my screen here. Paulo, it's good to see you, even though the world is slightly topsy-turvy. I don't know if your cell phone can be turned. And I took the liberty, Paulo. Go ahead.
No, just to say hi. I'm sorry, I had a problem here and I was just able to fix it, but go ahead, Matthew. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for being here. And we, of course, I was lapse in the haste to get this event started in not thanking you and Anya Prusa and all of the staff at the Wilson Center who are hosting today's event during a busy run up to the Thanksgiving holiday here in the United States. And so we're, of course, grateful to the Brazil Institute and to the Wilson Center. Let me turn without further ado then to Paulo Goldschmidt, who will continue to discuss some of these really astronomical figures and the Petrobras example in particular. Paulo, the floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Maria Lucia, for the beginning of the presentation. What I'm going to do right now in the second part of this presentation, we are going to deal with the possible effects of the Operation Car Wash on Petrobras' financial results. Since the beginning of its operation in 1953, Petrobras had been a very profitable company until the year of 2014. So I'm going to show you some slides. Just a moment. Okay. Okay, can you see the slides? Hope so. So these are the results of the financial results from Petrobras since 1986, which was the year when all these accounts started to be collected. But as you can see, the company was a quite profitable company, mainly after the year 2000. And suddenly in the year 2014, 2015, in 2016, the company showed huge losses. In the total, from 2014 to 2017, the company had a loss of nearly $21 billion. That's the figures that you can see in this slide. You have the amounts in reais, in Brazilian currency, and then the corresponding amount in dollars. As the year of 2014 was the one where the Operation Car Wash was disclosed, and Petrobras, as Maria Lucia mentioned, was in the center of the investigation, soon several critics of the operation argued that the losses reported by the company were a consequence of the investigations. If one looks closely to the figures of the financial results in 2014, two particular components could be stressed. The first was the formal acceptance of the corruption scheme in the company, and the second was related to the huge impairments made in the company's assets. Let's talk about the first part, about the corruption. The corruption loss formally accepted by the company in its 2014 financial statements was established in a very unorthodox manner. It was assumed that all contracts signed by Petrobras in the period from 2004 and 2012 had an overprice of 3%. The origin of this magic number was the plea bargain agreement signed by some former Petrobras executives, which were directly and explicitly involved in the corruption scheme in the company. Based in this magic number, the company decided to include an extraordinary expense of $2.3 billion in the financial statement of 2014, and thus, between quotes, cleaning up all the wrongdoings of the previous 9 years. This was the only time the company recognized explicitly in the corruption in its financial statements. In the statements of the next years, this amount was systematically appointed as the result of corruption in the company. The second particular component was impairment of assets. And in terms of the consequences to the financial results, nothing compares with the magnitude of the impairment of assets applied to the financial statements of the company. As you can see, in the period 2014 and 2017, impairment expenses reached the astronomical figure of $36 billion. For example, only in 2 Petrobras refineries, Abreu and Lima in the northeast of the country, and Comperj in the southeast of the country, the effect of the impairments in the year of 2014 was of roughly $12 billion. This was more than 5 times the amount recognized as corruption in the same year. impairment expenses were by far the largest group impacting the overall expenses on Petrobras, as you can see in the year 2014 and 2015. More than 40% of the total expenses were from impairments in 2014 and more than 30% in 2015. It's interesting to note that the second large group of expenses was formed by financial expenses. And this is not, of course, surprising, because a company has had one of the highest debt equity ratios among the largest oil companies in the world. With high debts, finance expenses are necessarily high. Anyway, the $36 billion of impairment expenses in the period 2014-2017 was an astonishing figure. Is impairment of assets a common practice in the oil industry? How the amount impaired by Petrobras could be compared to the amounts impaired by large oil companies around the world. Just as an example, Chevron made an impairment of $10 billion in 2019. Repsol from Spain made an impairment of $5 billion in 2019 also. British Petroleum, an impairment of $3 billion, also in 2019. Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, made an impairment of $2.3 billion, also in 2019. Exxon made an impairment of $2 billion in 2017. Equinor for Norway made an impairment of 1.4 billion in 2019. As you see, you can see most of the impairments of the largest oil companies in the world were made in 2019. In this year, Petrobras made only, between quotes, an impairment of $2.8 billion. The impairment of assets, it's a generally accepted accounting principle used by companies in order to make sure that the company's assets are carried at no more than their fair value. If an asset has a market value lesser than the value listed on the company's books, this asset should be written down to its current market value in order to reflect its real value. And the corresponding loss should be recognized as an expense on the company's balance sheet in the same accounting period. It's important to notice that impairment is a non-cash expense. In other words, when an impairment expense is applied to a particular asset, there is no impact in the company's cash flow. Normally, the impairment of a fixed asset can be described as an abrupt decrease in its fair value due to physical damage, changes in the existing loss, which may cause a permanent decrease in the asset value, increase in the competition, obsolescence of technology, and so on. The disparity between the amounts impaired by Petrobras when compared with previous years, as you can see in 2013, the impairment was only $500 million, and then it jumped to $16 billion in the next year. So the disparity between the amounts impaired by Petrobras when compared to previous years, the fact that no other company in the sector has recorded such a significant increase in their impairments, and the degree of subjectivity and lack of transparency of the assumptions used to perform the impairment tests were used as arguments to question the magnitude of the reduction of Petrobras assets. Quite true that the decrease in the price of oil in the international market, or the devaluation of the Brazilian currency, or the revisions in the oil and gas reserves were important elements for adopting impairment tests. But the doubts remain on the magnitude of the impairments and on the impact on Petrobras financial results. Let's use an example from the petrochemical complex in Rio de Janeiro, named Comperj. This complex had its construction started in 2008, and the total cost of the project was estimated in $6.5 billion. In the original project, the idea was the construction of a natural gas plant, 2 refineries, and a petrochemical plant. After a series of changes in the original project in 2015, Petrobras admitted that the total cost would reach $30.5 billion, almost 5 times the original cost. The Brazilian Federal Court of Accounts, the organ entitled to audit the accounts of administrators or other persons responsible for federal public funds and assets, made an audit in the petrochemical complex between 2015 and 2016. The final report presented by the auditors appointed several evidences of corruption and mismanagement practices in the complex. Contracts signed without previous risk analysis or even without a basic project, unrealistic time spent for several construction works, suppliers selected without specific qualification or experience, unnecessary contracts signed, practice of overpricing several contracts, and lack of effective controls in the company's management. As a result, the auditors estimated a loss at that moment of $12.5 billion in the petrochemical complex. 2 years later, Petrobras signed a non-prosecution agreement with the United States Department of Justice, recognizing the corruption scheme perpetrated by some of its executives in the petrochemical complex. The agreement disclosed the payment of bribes from large Brazilian contractors to some Petrobras executives who, in turn, had transferred these monies to some politicians in Brazil. Also, the non-prosecution agreement pointed out the leaking of confidential information to large contractors or from these executives to large contractors in order to favor these contractors in the bidding process. This agreement with the DOJ cost about $850 million to Petrobras. The impairment expenses applied to the Comperj complex in Rio de Janeiro in the period 2014 and 2017, the expenses were of approximately $10 billion, $8 billion only in the year of 2014. So, could the impairments be linked to the corruption scheme which involved Petrobras in all these years? The short answer is that yes, it's possible. The fact is that some amounts carried on Petrobras assets were inflated and did not represent correctly the real value of these assets. The official word of Petrobras for the impairments on the petrochemical complex were made in quite general terms. As you can see in this slide, the annual reports of the company in the years 2014, 2018 appoint as the cause for the impairments in Converge, difficulties in the project execution due to the necessity of cash preservation, problems in the chain of suppliers and partners due to the Operation Car Wash, problems in the project planning, and postponement of the expectation of cash generation of the project. As you can see, these reasons are quite generic. It might not be the only ones to justify the huge amounts of the impairments. Probably we will never know exactly how much money was diverted from the company in the petrochemical project. There is no doubt about the corruption scheme that operates in the project since the beginning of this execution. Not only Petrobras had recognized the corruption by signing the non-prosecution agreement with the United States Department of Justice, but also several plea bargains and lenience agreements were signed by some perpetrators involved in this scheme on the complex. It's understandable the difficulties in measuring the effects of the bribery and overprice in the company's assets. But since it's of public knowledge the occurrence of these facts, the company should at least have informed the existence of this malpractice while explaining its financial results. Unfortunately, we will never know exactly what proportion of these assets impaired could be explained by the different reasons appointed by Petrobras. Were all the assets acquired really needed for the company operation, or some of them could have been acquired only to generate shady deals to open opportunities for making easy money? As sad as it could be, the fact is that we will never know how much of the impairments made in Petrobras could be attributable to corruption or to bad management decisions or to weak market conditions. It's quite possible that what happened was a conjunction of these factors. The truth is that an enormous damage was caused to Petrobras, to its stakeholders, to the minority shareholders of the company, and by consequence to the Brazilian economy. But for sure, the amount of corruption in Petrobras is much higher than the 2.3 billion officially recognized by the company in its financial reports. The obvious conclusion of all this analysis is that without the impairments, Petrobras would never have shown negative financial results in the period from 2014 and 2017. It would have been as profitable as it had always been since its foundation. This does not mean that the impairments were not necessary, but what remains unknown is whether some slice of these impairments was used to hide fraudulent or actions by the company's executives. In other words, impairments could have been a strategy to cover up acts of corruption in the company. The Operation Car Wash was not responsible for the losses in Petrobras. It only made public how a bunch of criminals used the company to perpetrate one of the largest corruption schemes ever seen in the world. I think that it's all that I have for today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paulo Goldschmidt. It's wonderful to see the figures here and to put numbers to some of what we often talk about without numbers. Fabio, let me turn to you now. You are both a co-editor of this volume and a contributor to the chapter that you'll be describing for us today. I've already read your bio, but I should also mention that you are a global fellow and a longtime friend of the So welcome back, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matthew. It's a pleasure to see you here. I would like to express my gratitude to Paulo Sotero, first of all, and who, for the beginning of this project 1 year ago, host the proposal of this partnership between three of the most prestigious Brazilian universities, FGV, University of São Paulo, and Mackenzie University, to host this project. I'd like to express my gratitude and a special thanks to Marta Saad, Maria Tereza, Marco Zilli, João Paulo Ismânio, Marco Florencio, Lígia Maura, Adriano Teixeira, Raquel Escalcon, Giovanni Saavedra, Fernanda Vilares, who accepted to take part of this project with me, Paulo Goldschmidt, and Maria Lúcia. I will try to highlight some aspects from a legal perspective that I think would be interesting in order to discuss, I think, a main question that everyone takes on it, that what are the lessons? Is there any legacy after 6 years of the beginning of the operation? How can we organize all of this? We know there is a lot of criticism about the operation. We know there is a lot of studies that have been publishing since the last years. But what we tried to do on this book was to summarize some different aspects. We didn't pretend to exhaust the discussion, of course, but we tried to bring an interdisciplinary approach in order to give a wider perception about the results, about the opportunities to improve, especially not only from a legal perspective, but also from an institutional aspect as well. The first point that I would like to highlight is that corruption definitely has become a highlighted concern on the Brazilian agenda. And we are far away to finish it. I can assure that the fight against corruption will not end soon. I think we have a starting point, but certainly we don't have a finishing point because there is a long road to be followed. If we consider the pandemic, the recent pandemic that is affecting everyone, we have in Brazil current scandals of misuse of public resource that are revealed by different investigations. There is still a heritage from Odebrecht scheme that also should be investigated and prosecuted either. And it's important to remember also that there is a lot of different initiatives led not only by federal, state, and local institutions, but also civil society, but also from the civil society, asking for more transparency, asking for more control, asking for more accountability over public procurements, public servants, and political campaigns. The second comment that I would like to make is that a second important legacy that should be emphasized is the culture of integrity that we are watching within Brazilian companies. There is a very concrete concern within Brazilian companies on implementing compliance programs, integrity cultures, not only from an ideal or not only on the bookshelf, but also really concrete. And one aspect that foster this culture of integrity, in my opinion, is that the risk of criminal responsibility of the board of the company finally is real. I think the board of the companies has been taking serious the risk of criminal responsibility if they don't comply with the projects and programs of integrities within the company. A third comment that I would like to highlight is the political campaign financing that has changed from private funding to a public funding. And I think it's very early to assure that this change was good. I'm not convinced that it was really good. Why? Because the car wash operation showed or revealed a shadow and parallel financial system created to fund the relationship between politicians, entrepreneurs, and public servants. And this change on campaigns financing, I really can believe that this decision will affect this parallel and shadow models that were created before. The fourth comment that I would like to talk about is the legacy, is another legacy, which was written in our book by Marta Saadi and Maria Teresa Moura, is the role that international legal cooperation procedures and treaties played in the car wash operation. The effectiveness and the agility on sharing information, on sharing evidence, and freezing assets. This played a very important role, but on the other hand, there is a critical and a challenge that should be dealt. And Marta and Maria Teresa highlighted this on their chapter, that the protection of collaborator overseas is still a problem, especially because the risk of double jeopardy is still often. The Odebrecht case revealed that the international cooperation and the transaction and the transnationality of the damages caused through different countries highlighted this problem or of this risk of bis in idem, someone that could be prosecuted or investigated more than once by 2 or 3 different countries at the same time, and this is not comply with international agreements of human rights and safeguard procedural laws. The fifth comment that I would like to make is about the criminal cooperation agreements dealt with many defendants. This chapter was written by Marco Zilli from USP. And this discussion, at the same time that highlighted that the criminal agreements cooperation with defendants played a very important role on revealing the scheme, the Odebrecht scheme, particularly the Odebrecht scheme. On the other side, it brought a very important concern about the discretion powers of the parties on negotiation disagreements. And these wide discretion of powers within benefits and conditions without a consistent legal base to enforce it. Recently, there is a new law that changed this situation, reducing the powers of the parties, and increasing the controls over the procedures that should be taken from the beginning of the negotiation up to the end of the use of the collaborator witness within the process. The sixth comment that I would like to make and to share with you is about the model of task force that was very, very criticized. This issue was written by Fernanda Vilares in the chapter 1 from Getúlio Vargas from FGV. And there are some opinions defending a permanent special anti-corruption group. In my opinion, it doesn't matter the model of task force. What is important is public scrutiny, check and balance controls, professional commitment, independence, and transparent in working flows and procedures. It doesn't matter, as I said, it doesn't matter the model of interagency arrangement, permanent or transitory. The systemic corruption, like Maria Lucia described in the beginning of this webinar, systemic corruption presupposes bringing together different accountability institutions around the same table, sharing information and sharing decision-making process in order to prevent and control and answer better to the problem, not only focusing on investigation or punishing the criminals. The seventh comment that I would like to make is the controversy related to the creation of the car wash fund and the use of different tools over illegal proceeds. Again, the problem of wide discretion powers, in this case of the prosecution office. I think our guideline on these issues should be the law, the rule of law. And each part plays a different role in the criminal justice system, okay? At the same time that the prosecution office is in charge of investigating and prosecuting, it cannot be in charge of managing assets. It cannot be in charge of managing the results or the products of a complex investigation. I think we should take care on this, because the more the discretion powers are increased, the higher the risk of misconduct, and the higher the risk of lack of confidence about the concrete purpose that you are looking for, okay? So I think it's important to emphasize about the limits of the discretion powers that were that were criticized by different opinions, and not only in Brazil, but abroad as well. The eighth comment, I don't know how much time do I have, but I'm ending my remarks, 2 minutes. The future of Lava Jato, it was a question briefed by Matthew during our last conversation. You know, there is no doubt that Lava Jato car washes symbolize a very important chapter in the Brazilian history on fighting corruption. But I think that it cannot be interpreted as an isolated initiative. We have so many initiatives around the country from different perspectives, from different levels, not only from a federal perspective, but also from state and local perspective. And this is important to highlight all time, okay? Because a very important legacy from Lava Jato, from car wash, is that this initiative, or the different initiatives on fighting against corruption, are massified around the country. We can see, we can watch it every day in the news, okay? So I think we should turn this page, okay? What is the next? And what is the next, in my opinion? In my opinion, we should strengthen institutions, democratic institutions in Brazil, not only from the executive, from the parliament, but also from the criminal justice system. The more we empowered, the more we strengthen democratic institutions, the less the risk of pushing back. I think this is the great fear currently. How concrete is the risk of pushing back? And I think the good road and the good speech and the good manner to guarantee that we are going forward, okay, is protecting our institutions, is protecting our public careers. And I think that this will reduce the risk of pushing back. The risk of legal reforms, institutional reforms, it always exists. Democracy is this. We should live with different opinions, different points of view. This is democracy. But what we should take care all time is our institutions. We should defend our institutions all time. It doesn't matter who is in charge of. What is, in the end of the day, what is really important is the institutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fabio. This has been a wonderful set of presentations. Again, congratulations on this publication, which is available on the Brazil Institute website. We already have some questions coming in. Just a reminder to the audience that you can email your questions to brazil@wilsoncenter.org. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll ask a couple of questions, but I would ask the panelists to try to keep your questions, your answers relatively short, maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and that'll give us a chance to get through as many as we're able here. Professor Maria Lucia, you talked both in your presentation and in the chapter about the damage that's been done to Brazil because of systemic corruption. And you said that the corruption that's been done in the past 2 decades has been unprecedented, especially by comparison to other countries. And I know it's a huge question, but do you have a sense of why that is? What was it about the past 2 decades in Brazil that made systemic corruption both greater than it had been in the past, as well as by comparison to other countries?
Well, this is, of course, is a very complex question. I try to make a short answer for an enormous discussion, because, of course, this is a political issue. You know, this is the main question. Is a political that has a political basis. You know, okay. In my opinion, when the Works Party rise to the power, they decided to keep the power forever. This is the first thing, yeah. And because perhaps based on their ideology, because they are leftists, or just because they consider democracy very good to achieve the power, and it's not good to leave the power. This is not only a problem of the PT, of course, but this is a problem. You can answer the question. Just to use in the reference for the way that the Works Party conducted the power, not only in the federal government. You have to remember that they start to be in power in the 80s in the small seats, and then after in large seats. In the method of conduct, the executive was really the same. When they achieved the federal government, this way to conduce all the business, all the control, all the government machine, it was exactly the same that they used in the small states at the beginning of the party in power in the 80s. This is a fact, because if you consider the first 20 years after our democratization in Brazil, we can see, of course, you can find a lot of cases. I can mention someone by memory. You know, the railroad north-south starting in 1987, for example. We have a lot of other situations, but not a systematic way to control all the states in the all levels possible. This is very different. And as Fabio mentioned, the only way to combat this, and it was effective in the Brazilian case, is having institutions that deal with this situation in a very good way, and also provided the possibility for the civil society to participate. This is very important, because you are talking about the operation conducted by the Brazilian Federal Police, you are talking, and also to the Minister of Public Prosecution, but you have to consider also the society participation. It was very important for this case. And this is the democracy, in my point of view, is the only way to not to avoid completely, but to deal with this systemic corruption. To preserve democracy is the most important thing. And I totally agree with Fabio, with many considerations, and also to preserve and to empower our democratic institutions. This is very important. You know.
Thank you. Both you and Fabio have mentioned this. I wanted to maybe piggyback off of that to another question, and this would be for Paulo Goldschmidt. You know, you mentioned the non-prosecution agreement that the United States DOJ, the Department of Justice, signed with Petrobras. But what I find intriguing is that long before that agreement was signed, the Brazilian Federal Court of Accounts, the TCU, had already raised a lot of doubts about the Comperge project, which is one of your case studies. And so I guess thinking about the strength of institutions, I wonder, Professor Goldschmidt, what your thought is about why is it that those institutions didn't lead to the accountability earlier? The Brazilian institutions weren't able to contribute to the accountability that we saw in the deferred prosecution agreement.
Okay, I think this is a quite interesting question. First, we should understand that this federal court of accounts is not part of the judiciary system in Brazil. It's only an organ representing the legislative house. So it's a court that is part of the legislative power in Brazil. So when this court showed the problems that were happening or in Comperge, it was a huge work that they had done. They worked a lot of time. If I remember well, it took 8 months during their studies, their analysis. And the problem is that they could not enforce anything to the company because they are not part of the judiciary. And if you look by the side of the company, for Petrobras or for the executives that were diverting money from the company, they simply didn't care because this was not the judiciary system saying you are going to be penalized if you do that. You know, so this this does not mean that the opinion or the results presented by the Federal Court of Accounts were not important. They are, but this information should flow to others, to the judiciary system in order to take the necessary actions in order to prevent this. You know? The Federal Court of Accounts doesn't have any enforcement over a company. They just show how the problems are. So, in short, there was no interest in the Petrobras or for the Petrobras executives to correct these problems because they were profiting with this situation. They were getting the money. They were paying bribes to politicians or to political parties. Well, only when the judiciary enters in the scene, then this should be a concern for these executives. So that's my opinion on that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I would like to come back to reforms because some of what you're saying here suggests that further reform is needed to make these institutions work well together. But let me turn first to Fabio Bechara. Fabio, you are a state prosecutor, and I know that you're here also as a professor and in your personal role. But we have a question from the audience that I think you would be uniquely qualified to answer, which is about, we are mainly talking in this case about the federal level, but the audience member talks about the huge roadblocks and hurdles at the state and municipal levels, particularly for business people trying to do business at the local level, in this case, a foreign business entrepreneur. So I'm curious if you could say something about the relationship between Lava Jato, which you've already spoken about, which was a federal prosecution, and the state and municipal problems of corruption, which may also be considered systemic in many places.
Thank you, Matthew, for the question. Maybe my comment here is not a comment; it's a witness, and I can witness that my experience is the best. The relationship between different levels of different institutions, not only from federal, but also from local and also from other states as well. I think why do you have, of course, I agree with many people that criticize that our federal system sometimes brings a huge problem of cooperation between different actors from different actors. But the problem is posed. The problem is not recent. It's something that's present in the Brazilian history. Okay, so we should deal with this every day. How to do this? Once I've heard from a national police officer from Colombia in the end of the 80s, in the end of the 90s, sorry, beginning of the 20s. And he said to me, what is the keyword on this? Soft skills. Soft skills is related to behavior from people. What I would like to say is that all the institutions that we represent, they don't give us dignity. We have to defend the dignity to the institutions. And so, and this statement is related to behavior, to personal and professional commitment with the proposal, not with personal objectives or personal interests. If we don't have this mindset, if we don't have this maturity to go ahead, we will fail. It's the same as a soccer game. When you lose the game, you have two options. You can learn with your mistakes, or you can charge the judge to say you lose because of the judge. Even sometimes the judge has plays a very important role in the result of the game. But I think there is a first step of this. What are our mistakes on this? And I think, Matthew, in this relationship, and now I'm witnessing this relationship between federal institutions, state institutions, and local institutions depends on personal and professional behavior. It doesn't matter. The rule can be the best one, okay? The institution can have so much resource. If people from the career don't have the maturity and the mentality to work together, to share information, to share the decision-making process, probably we will fail.
That's in many ways, you're already beginning to get to reform because it's essentially what you're suggesting is a culture, changing the culture or maintaining the culture as the case may be, improving the culture. I want to maybe piggyback off of that for a question for Maria Lucia. You know, you talked about systemic corruption, and in conditions of systemic corruption, it's often hard to make progress precisely because the institutions aren't working the way that they are. I know it's a huge question, but Lava Jato seems to have overcome that, has somehow found a way around the systemic corruption. But I did want to also ask you to speak a little bit. You talked about systemic corruption under the PT. There was, of course, there have been corruption scandals under the last two presidential administrations in Brazil. And so I wonder, could you speak a little bit to that relationship between systemic corruption and these very important efforts to overcome that systemic corruption in more recent years?
Okay, yeah, first of all, it's a very good question to ask how Lava Jato or car wash succeeded in that situation, you know. And you have to count also that in 2005, we had a very huge scandal in 2005. The name is mensalão, or the big monthly payment. Yes, in the first term of the PT government. And yeah, it's a very huge scandal because it's a way to corrupt all the congressmen. This is very dangerous for democracy. You know, that's the reason you are point out that Lava Jato is very important, because show all this situation. And at the time in 2005, it was of course we had a reaction in the country, but the political situation, was different at the time, and this is a way to overcome the works part, overcome the situation and re-elect the president, you know. But in 2014, we had the support of the civil society. That's the first answer for you. How to succeed? The car wash operation succeeded. Of course, because you have institutions. Of course, because you have personnel also committed with their obligations regarding the country, you know, yeah. But the support of the civil society was very important in that case. Talking about the Temer administration, as I understood, and the current administration, of course, we have in the Temer administration an enormous, not exactly scandal, but it was a fact event so glamorous that was a tape with the president, with a person, and the president, the former president Temer, and after all, it was concluded that it's not exactly the tape was edited and so on. And of course, it was a very complicated situation, but we had this problem in the Temer administration. But in general, Temer administration corrected many of things that occurred in the works party administration. That's the reason that Temer put the country in a track to growth again, to recover the economy. Because I didn't mention this, but just to give an idea, Brazil in 2014, 15, and 16, because the impeachment occurred in May 16, Brazil had a terrible economic results, a decrease of our GDP in this period around 10%, and nothing else occurred in international scenario or domestic scenarios, only due to the malpractice of the PT government. This is very important to stress it, because it's not a continual government. It was a different situation, a very different situation. Yeah, this is the case of Temer. And also in this, the current government, the Bolsonaro government, we watched this pandemic scandals, as Fabio Bechara mentioned, yes? Part of the resources to the states were stolen. In the state of Rio de Janeiro, the government is under the impeachment process, you know? The situation is this nowadays, but the most important thing, in my point of view, that the society in general is much more aware about the consequences of the corruption, the system corruption, and that's very important. It's not only a matter of culture, but it's a matter of political position, you know, to be against this kind of practices. This is very important.
Thank you. A cultural shift within society as a whole, it sounds like, beyond what Fabio was talking about within the institutions. Paulo Goldschmidt, if I could ask you, you have presented a great deal of information about Petrobras and the impairments in particular, and I'm curious what you think has been done or still needs to be done to ensure greater compliance and integrity within that very important company, which last time I looked represented, you know, the petroleum sector represented something between 10 and 12% of GDP when you add it all up. So this is a very significant one. And I'm wondering how you feel about the current state of reform within Petrobras with regard to corruption.
Okay. Let me point, I think, a very important issue. There is no problem of governance in Petrobras in terms of the bylaws of the company. You know, if you go back to the Fernando Henrique Cardoso government we started in 1994, the then president of Petrobras established a governance program that was primorose. It was a fantastic program. So the laws, the bylaws were there. The compliance program or the governance of the Petrobras was written in a very specific and correct way. You know? And then you ask, how did things happen? If there was a very good governance, at least on the paper, how did they let happen what happened in Petrobras with the numbers that we just show you in the presentation? And the short question is, work with honest people. Well, there is no scheme of governance that will survive if you work with dishonest people. No? So it's always a way of overpass all the laws of the bylaws if people is bad with bad intentions. No? So I think this is the point. It's a point of choosing the right people, honest people to work with your company, not only Petrobras, all the state-owned companies. No? We are not seeing in this present government any scandals from the federal government. At least now, up to now, if you compare with the previous governments, the scandals were every day on the papers. You don't see it right now because the feeling that we have is that the people who is now managing the large corporations are honest people. They are not there to steal money from the government. They are not there for corruption. They are not there for paying bribes or receiving bribes. No? So I think that we should be careful in terms of governance. I remember that Fabio mentioned in his presentation, and also Maria Lucia made, saying governance is important. Yes, it's very important, but you have to work with honest people. You have to select people that will work for the company and not against the company. It's difficult. It is very, very difficult. But it's the only way, because just put on the papers will not be sufficient to avoid things that happened to Petrobras and to other state-owned companies in the past. The paper does not solve all the problems. You have to work with honest people, right people. It's a short answer, but that's what I have to say.
That's very interesting. We keep coming back to people and culture and norms. I will have to call it a day here. It's 10:28. I want to give Paulo Sotero the final word, but thank you all very much. It's been an instigating, thought-provoking conversation. So congratulations once again. Paulo, the floor is yours. You're on mute, Paulo. You're on mute.
Hello? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, do you hear me now? Okay. Now, just to thank you very much, Matthew, for your role today and for everything you did for us and you do for us at the Wilson Center as a former fellow. For the participants also, this was one of the most rewarding initiatives that at least I had in my almost 14 years as director of the Brazil Institute. A very special thanks to Anya Prusa, because she was the person that put this together and every parts of this before in previous years and allowed us to come to this moment. And finally, a suggestion. I think that obviously we all know that systemic corruption did not start with the Workers' Party. It was particularly annoying, and I think that's part of the reaction, is that the Workers' Party was created, the only real political party in Brazil, emerged in the late 70s, 80s as a party committed to introduce ethics to Brazil politics, that it was a novel concept in 1980, just a few short 40 years ago. But corruption in Brazil has been, systemic corruption is probably something that started centuries ago. One way of staying in this focus on this topic is to, and this would be my suggestion for the future, is that, for instance, maybe 5 years from today, we reconvene, we make an effort and see how is the fight against corruption, for honest government going in Brazil. Just keep in mind what we just went through in the United States, the nightmare that is ending here, thank God. but we have to keep at this. And I suggest, Anya, maybe in 5 years or in 10 years, when Anya will be the director of the Brazil Institute, or was something even more important, that we reconvene and we take stock about the fight for the rule of law in Brazil. Thank you very much for all of you. A special thanks to Anya.